Hello, adventurers. Hail and well met. For your entertainment, I present my contribution to this year's Big Bot Bash. I was afraid I was going to get something really weird on the random bot generator, but it worked out. When I saw a pilot, I immediately knew I wanted to write a story about a pilot character, and the first questions about the build began to form. Who is the pilot? What is his name? How did the pilot and the bot become a team? How does all of this relate to the merchant flavor? A merchant pilot. Now there's an interesting character. A while back I had made this little creature out of 2-part epoxy clay. I knew right away I was going to use this for the pilot. It fit the requirements for the build. It was handmade and a bit weird and perfect for my story. I named him Murl and decided that he was a noodle merchant. I remembered there was a noodle shop mentioned in the town of Respite. I thought it would be cool if I could set this build in Bill's Ruster world. I reached out and asked if I could use his setting, and he said yes. So a huge thank you to our patron saint of big bots, Bill. Thank you, Bill. For the engine, I had these lights that were supposed to be fiber optic shoelaces. I decided these odd lights would be the power source for the engine of the Spiderbot. The lights were the only parts that I scavenged. Everything else is scratch built. Since I don't have the luxury of spending money on kits just to get a few bits, and don't really have collections of anything, I relied on my ability to turn paper and imagination into a Spiderbot. The pilot is a slugnoid. He or she, it's hard to tell with slugnoids, comes from an isolated colony of benevolent creatures that, like many of the Ruster cultures, ended up there through mishap and are now eking out a living in the unforgiving wastes. The slugnoids are actually quite peaceful and love nothing more than sipping a milkweed shake in the hot shade of a rust shelter while watching the dusty landscape rearrange itself. For the cab, I used some clear plastic from a food container and built up the rest with foam core and cardboard. Ultimately, it ended up looking like a small garbage truck, but that is actually perfect for the rust wastes. You may be wondering, how do a milkweed-sipping, peace-loving slugnoid and a rusty Spiderbot become a team? Well, let me tell you a story. Murl was a scientist. He was unique among his kind in that he had an insatiable curiosity about the world. A few times a year, the gleaner caravans would visit his settlement. Between negotiations for the milkweed yogurt that the slugnoids made, they would trade stories with the locals. They spoke of strange machines that wandered the dead sands, and tribes of beings that dressed up as robots and even worshipped some of the machines as gods. Other tribes rode around on enormous lizards. They spoke of pirates and mercenaries that had hidden bases deep in the toxic wastes. They described nameless creatures that hid among the ruins and huge insects. There were pools of toxic liquid that strange glowing fish swam around in. The dead sands were far from dead. There was a lively and varied population prospering in the desolation. Fascinated by the tales, Murl decided he would take his sketchbook and camera and document the life forms and tribes that lived among the discarded husks of the ancient war machines. He wanted to see them for himself and maybe write a book about it. He might even become famous. Wouldn't that be something, he thought to himself, as he packed his milkweed yogurt, Solaflect parasol, and rad tent for a couple of days out in the wastes. Murl had never been outside of the settlement. It would be the first time in his life he had been beyond the blast fence. He headed out into the vastness on his 10 stumpy legs, his facial tentacles waving excitedly. Within a few hours, Murl had become hopelessly lost. He pitched his factory-fresh, never-used anti-rad tent just ahead of sunset. The blazing sky turned a burnt orange color before darkness came. His expedition so far had been a little disappointing. He hadn't seen any nomads, pirates, or mercenaries, just a few tiny lizards and a rust buzzard that seemed to be following him. Alone in his tiny tent, he fell asleep. But it didn't last long. His daylight walkabout had been practically uneventful, but the darkness was alive with incomprehensible sounds. Creaking, clanking, groaning, growling, scraping, and the occasional blood-curdling scream kept him awake most of the night. In the darkest hours, a powerful sandstorm kicked up, crushing the tent around him. At sunrise, he dug himself out from the sand dune that had accumulated over the shredded tent. He then discovered that sometime during the night, a creature had gnawed through his backpack and eaten his supplies. But he still had his camera and sketchbook. All was not lost. The shredded tent was left behind, a sacrifice to the sands. Undeterred by the inconvenience of losing his food and shelter, he began walking. Hours passed with little change in the flat terrain. In the distance, there was a jagged silhouette of what looked like low hills. Maybe there will be some nomads or pirates there that he could interview for his book, he thought. The hills turned out to be the remains of a colossal wreck, one of the decommissioned war machines that had been discarded on the planetary junkyard of this world. There was something else on the horizon. At first, Murl thought it might be one of the giant blimp jellies that troll the skies, dragging their stinging tentacles across the sand and pulling up whatever meat they touched. But it turned out to be something far worse, a rustnado. A thin, crooked funnel cloud reached down from the orange sky like a tentacle searching for prey. In minutes, it would soon become a twister full of scrap metal. Where it punched the ground, shards and bits of spinning steel exploded upwards, pulled from the sand like weeds by the magnetic anomaly that generated the rustnados. Murl began to run as fast as his 10 stumpy legs would propel him. Slugnoids were not known for their speed. As they like to say, slugnoids aren't slow. They simply don't hurry. This time, Murl was hurrying. He had to get to the shelter of the wreck before the rustnado hit him. Getting caught in a rustnado was like being thrown into a blender, and it was heading straight for him as if it was hunting him down. He ran into the ruins just in time to hear the metallic hailstorm begin to pound the hull. Jagged slivers flew through the openings like bullets. For hours, the rustnado battered the rusted hulk, grinding it down even more. The dimming light meant that it would be night soon. He remembered hearing that hulks were haunted by the angry ghosts of the defeated dead. The storm outside was getting worse. The air vibrated with the constant roar. He began to deeply regret his decision to leave home in search of adventure. His dreams of writing an important book about the cultures of the Dead Sands were crumbling like the remains of the derelict vessel he was sheltering in. Traveling the known worlds and giving enthralling lectures about his discoveries seemed so stupid now. If he was lucky, a search party might find his remains and give him a proper memorial. His despair was interrupted by a new sound. It was a low creaking at first, then followed by the screeching sound of buckling metal. The boom of collapsing steel went on for minutes, each crash burying him deeper in the wreck. In darkness, trapped under the rubble, he waited for the storm to end. As the sun rose, tiny shafts of light pierced the cramped, jumbled space. The air began to warm. In the dimly lit hole, Murl saw jagged metal protruding everywhere. He tried to pull away one of the larger pieces and dig his way out, but the space groaned and became smaller. Exhausted and desperate, Murl could think of nothing else to do but shout out for help. Slugnoids have soft little voices, and all anyone would have heard was a low trilling that might have been a bird or an insect. The distinctive screeching sound of a power tool cutting through steel stopped his calling out. Sound vibrated through his body as the smell of burning metal filled the air of the cramped space. A burst of bright light hit his eyes as the metal was thrown back. Standing over him, Silhouetted against the orange sky was a huge mechanical giant spider with glowing blue eyes. A hydraulically powered arm reached into the tight space and delicately closed around Murl, lifting him out of the ragged metal crater. The spider bot slowly lumbered over the crumpled derelict to safe ground. It set Murl down gently before sagging to the hot sand, its battery power expended. The blue glow of the engine pods grew dim and winked out. The powerful mechanical legs wilted as their hydraulic pressure fell with a hissing sound. Murl stared at the machine for a long time, grateful for the rescue. This event was going to be the opening chapter for his book. He pulled his sketchbook from his tattered backpack and began drawing the robot and making notes. Satisfied that he had recorded all of the important details, he wanted to return the favor of his rescue. Prying open the rear hatch, he stepped into the main compartment. Ironically, among the dust, wires, and hydraulic leaks, smaller spiders had spun webs in the corners of the cab. Among the webs was a faded sign in high galactic that read, "Mobile Rescue Vehicle." Murl spent the rest of the day scavenging power sources from the nearby ghost ships. Near dusk, he found a working power supply and hooked it up to the spider bot. A series of rapid clicks emanated from the console, and the screens slowly came to life. Awaiting orders, the screen displayed. Murl thought for a few moments. He wasn't ready to go home, and now it seemed he had a ride. He typed in, "Respite." "Course confirmed," the screen blinked. The hydraulic legs came to life as the cab rose above the desert. In a few hours, the ambling spider-bot arrived at the ruster town of Respite. They walked past the sprawling airfields surrounding the town. Murl had never seen so much concrete. He stopped to take photos of all the spacecraft he saw. It was the first time he had seen spacers on their way to parts unknown. Approaching the edge of town and peering through the dirty windows of the cab, Murl made out an illuminated sign that read, "Captain Sharon's Goodle Shack." It was then Murl realized how hungry he was, and a bowl of hot noodles were just the thing he needed right now. Over the next year, Murl and Merv traveled across the wastes, befriending pirates, mercenaries, and even some of the fierce feral tribes that lived in the dead sands. Murl discovered that one of the best ways to establish a rapport was by bringing some of the hot, mildly intoxicating noodles cooked up by Captain Sharon. After a time, Murl and Merv were well known as the traveling noodle merchants that wandered the wastes, rescuing the lost and hungry. Murl finally did finish his book.